moments in life that do not announce themselves with noise. No thunder breaks across the sky. No dramatic revelation tears through the fabric of your reality. Instead, something far more unsettling begins to happen. You start feeling disconnected from the person you once were. The conversations that once entertained you now feel hollow. The places that once felt familiar suddenly feel emotionally distant. Even the dreams you spent years chasing begin to lose their emotional gravity as though some invisible force inside you has quietly withdrawn its energy from the life you built around survival. And this is the moment most people misunderstand, because they think something is wrong with them. But what if this strange emptiness is not a collapse? What if it is the first clue that your soul is preparing you for the greatest transformation of your life? Carl Jung once said that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And yet, there comes a stage in human existence where the soul refuses to remain silent any longer. A stage where the unconscious mind begins tearing apart the false identity you created to survive childhood, rejection, disappointment, humiliation, loneliness, and emotional abandonment. And if you have been feeling this recently, if something inside you feels restless, if your inner world feels heavier than usual, if you feel emotionally detached from ordinary life, then stay with me, because these are not random emotions. These are clues. Clues that you are standing at the edge of a psychological rebirth. And what Jung discovered about this process changes everything. Maybe lately you have noticed yourself withdrawing from people. Not because you hate them, but because superficial conversations suddenly exhaust you. You can no longer pretend to care about things that do not nourish your spirit. The mask has become too heavy. And here is the part nobody talks about when your consciousness begins evolving. Your nervous system starts rejecting environments that once kept your false self alive. This is why the beginning of transformation often feels like isolation. The old personality starts dying before the new one is fully born, which means you exist between two worlds. One version of you is dissolving. Another version is trying to emerge. And the space between them feels deeply uncomfortable, almost like wandering through a dark hallway inside your own mind. Jung called this process individuation, the painful but sacred journey toward becoming who you truly are beneath the conditioning, beneath the wounds, beneath the masks you created to gain love, acceptance, and emotional safety. But most people never reach this stage because the moment the ego begins losing control, fear appears. Fear of losing relationships, fear of losing identity, fear of becoming unfamiliar to yourself. So they return to distraction. They drown themselves in noise, stimulation, routine, social validation, endless scrolling, meaningless ambitions, anything to avoid hearing the quiet voice inside them whisper, "You are becoming someone else, but you kept listening," even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. And that changes everything. Because one of the clearest clues that you are about to enter the best stage of your life is this. You begin questioning everything you once blindly accepted, not rebelliously, not dramatically, but internally. You start noticing how deeply society conditions people to abandon themselves. You realize how many identities are inherited rather than discovered. How many people spend their entire lives performing versions of themselves designed to be accepted instead of understood. And suddenly, you cannot unsee it. You notice it in conversations, in relationships, in careers, in the emotional performances people call personality. You begin sensing the invisible architecture behind human behavior, the hidden fears, the unconscious wounds, desperate need to belong. And this awareness isolates you emotionally because once consciousness expands, you can no longer comfortably shrink yourself back into unconscious living. This is where most people remain trapped, because awareness without transformation becomes suffering. But what happens next changes everything. The unconscious mind starts sending signals, strange dreams, unexpected memories, intense emotional reactions, moments of silence that suddenly feel overwhelming. And perhaps The most unsettling sign of all. You begin remembering parts of yourself you abandoned long ago. The creative side, the emotional side, the curious side, the authentic side that had to disappear so you could survive difficult environments. This is not weakness. This is psychological resurrection. Your buried self is trying to return. Jung believed the human psyche constantly seeks wholeness, even when the conscious mind resists it, which means the anxiety you feel may not actually be anxiety. It may be suppressed truth rising toward consciousness. And if this resonates deeply with you, if you have felt this strange internal shift recently, write the number 11 in the comments, not for superstition, but as a quiet symbol that a part of your soul has begun awakening from emotional sleep. Because something extraordinary happens when a person stops running from themselves. The darkness they feared begins transforming into clarity. The pain they carried begins revealing hidden wisdom. The loneliness they suffered begins turning into inner independence. And slowly, very slowly, they stop seeking permission to exist. But the transition is brutal. Because before you can enter the best stage of your life, the illusion must collapse. The illusion that your worth depends on external validation. The illusion that fitting in is more important than authenticity. The illusion that suppressing your emotions makes you strong. Real strength begins the moment you stop abandoning yourself. And this is where Jung's philosophy becomes terrifyingly accurate. He believed that the parts of ourselves we reject do not disappear, they become shadow. The hidden psychological dimension where shame, anger, grief, desire, fear, creativity, sensitivity, and suppressed truth wait in silence. And eventually, the shadow demands to be seen, not to destroy you, but to make you whole. This is why your emotions may feel more intense lately. Why certain people trigger you unexpectedly. Why old memories suddenly return. Why your tolerance for fake connections is disappearing. The unconscious mind is opening locked doors, and the person you are becoming can no longer survive through emotional numbness. Stay with me because this is important. Many people think the best stage of life begins when external success arrives. More money, more recognition, more status, more admiration. But Jung understood something far deeper. The best stage of life begins when inner fragmentation starts, healing. When your outer life no longer controls your inner peace. When your identity stops depending on applause. When solitude becomes restorative instead of painful. When you finally stop betraying your authentic nature just to remain emotionally acceptable to others, that is freedom. And perhaps this is why your life feels strange right now. Because internally you are standing at a threshold. One foot still inside your old existence. One foot stepping towards psychological rebirth. Thresholds are uncomfortable places. They are neither the past nor the future. They are the sacred space where identity dissolves, where the old mask cracks, where the unconscious begins whispering truths the ego spent years trying to silence. But what Jung discovered next was even deeper. The people who enter this stage often experience a profound shift in perception before their external life changes at all. In other words, the transformation begins invisibly. First, your inner world changes. Then reality reorganizes itself around your new consciousness. And that is why the signs are subtle at first. You lose interest in proving yourself. You crave silence more than stimulation. You become emotionally selective. You start protecting your energy. You feel drawn toward truth, even when it hurts. These are not signs of becoming lost. These are signs of becoming real. And once this process begins, there is no returning to who you used to be. Because the soul, once awakened, kept comfortably returned to sleep. There is a reason your inner world has become louder lately. A reason ordinary distractions no longer numb you the way they once did. A reason certain nights feel unbearably heavy, as though something ancient inside you is trying to speak through the silence. Most people never understand this stage because they mistake awakening for suffering. But Jung saw it differently. He believed that beneath the surface of every human personality exists an entire hidden world, a buried psychological landscape filled with forgotten emotions, denied desires, suppressed instincts, childhood wounds, and abandoned identities. The unconscious is not empty, it is alive. And when a person approaches a major transformation, the unconscious begins surfacing everything the conscious mind tried to avoid. This is why your emotions may feel unpredictable lately. You are not simply reacting to life. You are encountering yourself. And this is where everything changes. Because one of the clearest clues that you are about to enter the best stage of your life is this. The mask you spent years building no longer fits your soul. Jung called this mask the persona, the social self, the acceptable self, the version of you designed to survive society, the smiling version, the agreeable version, the emotionally controlled version, the version that learned very early in life which emotions were safe and which emotions had to disappear. Maybe you learned that vulnerability made people uncomfortable. Maybe you learned that expressing anger created rejection. Maybe you learned that sensitivity was weakness. So slowly, without realizing it, you began constructing an identity designed not around authenticity, but around protection. And at first, it worked. The persona helped you adapt, helped you belong, helped you survive emotionally difficult environments. But eventually, the soul grows tired of performance. And here is the part nobody talks about: the more disconnected you become from your authentic self, the more exhausted life begins to feel. Because pretending drains psychic energy. Every time you silence your truth, every time you suppress your emotions, every time you betray your instincts to remain accepted, the unconscious records it. Nothing disappears. It sinks deeper. And over time, these buried fragments form what Jung called the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is simply the parts of yourself you were forced to hide. Your anger, your grief, your creativity, your sensuality, your ambition, your emotional hunger, your loneliness, your power. The tragedy is that most people spend their entire lives running from their shadow, which means they spend their entire lives running from themselves. But you are beginning to notice something different. The emotions you once avoided are now demanding attention. The loneliness feels symbolic. The triggers feel revealing. The pain feels intelligent somehow, almost as if life itself is trying to force you inward. And that is exactly what is happening. Because transformation never begins externally. It begins in the hidden architecture of the psyche. Stay with me because this is important. When your unconscious mind senses that you are psychologically ready to evolve, it begins dismantling false structures inside you. This process feels chaotic because the ego experiences it as death, and in many ways, it is. Not physical death, psychological death. The death of false identity, unconscious patterns. The death of emotional illusions. This is why people often feel lost before entering the best chapter of their lives. The old self collapses first. But what most people never realize is that the collapse is not punishment. It is preparation. Think about a forest after a storm. At first, destruction appears everywhere. Broken branches, fallen trees, shattered silence. But beneath the surface, something extraordinary is happening. Light is finally reaching places that darkness once controlled. And psychologically, the same thing happens to you. The collapse creates space for consciousness. This is why you may suddenly feel emotionally detached from people who once felt important. Not because you became cold, but because your nervous system is becoming more sensitive to energetic dishonesty. You begin noticing manipulation more quickly. You sense emotional emptiness faster. You recognize performative behavior more clearly. And while others continue playing unconscious social roles, something inside you refuses to participate the same way anymore. This can feel incredibly isolating, because awakening often separates you from environments that once felt emotionally familiar. But familiarity is not always alignment. Sometimes familiarity is simply repeated pain. And this is where Jung's insight becomes almost terrifyingly accurate. He believed we are unconsciously drawn toward what remains unresolved inside us, which means many relationships are not based on love at all. but on mutual unconscious wounds people attach through fear, through validation, through emotional dependency, through trauma patterns mistaken for connection. And when you begin healing, those dynamics start collapsing. Suddenly, relationships feel different. You crave depth instead of stimulation, presence instead of attention, truth instead of performance. You stop wanting to be admired and start wanting to be understood. That shift changes your entire reality. But the transition hurts, because the ego interprets emotional growth as abandonment. This is why you may feel periods of intense loneliness lately, not ordinary loneliness. Existential loneliness. The feeling that nobody fully understands the transformation happening inside you, and perhaps they do not. Because psychological rebirth cannot always be explained with language. Some transformations happen in silence, like roots growing beneath frozen ground, invisible, slow, sacred. And here is another clue: you are approaching the best stage of your life. You are becoming more aware of your emotional triggers instead of simply reacting to them. This is massive, because unconscious people blame others for everything they feel. Conscious people investigate themselves. They ask, why did this affect me so deeply? What wound is this touching? What hidden fear is revealing itself right now? That level of self-awareness changes destiny. Because the moment you become conscious of a pattern, you stop being fully controlled by it. And what Jung discovered next was even deeper. The unconscious communicates through repetition, the same emotional pain, the same relationship dynamics, the same fears, the same disappointments. Not because life hates you, but because the psyche repeats unresolved lessons until consciousness emerges. Your pain has been trying to teach you something, and once you finally understand the lesson, the cycle begins breaking. This is why the best stage of your life often begins after emotional exhaustion, after heartbreak, after betrayal, after identity collapse, after isolation, after the painful realization that external approval can never heal internal emptiness. The soul awakens when illusion becomes unbearable. And maybe that is why you can no longer tolerate fake versions of yourself. You are tired, not physically, spiritually tired. Tired of shrinking, tired of pretending, tired of suppressing your intuition, tired of betraying your inner truth just to remain emotionally digestible for people who abandoned themselves long ago. And if this resonates deeply, if you feel like your inner world has been undergoing a silent war recently, write 777 in the comments, because there are moments in life when the psyche begins reorganizing itself for a completely different future, and you may be inside one of those moments right now. But here is the danger. Many people turn back during this stage. The discomfort becomes too intense, so they return to distractions, to toxic patterns, to emotional numbness, to familiar suffering, because the unknown terrifies the ego more than pain. At least pain feels familiar, but transformation demands uncertainty. It demands surrender. It demands the courage to walk through psychological darkness without fully knowing who you will become on the other side. This is the true meaning of shadow work. Not performing spirituality online. Not pretending to be enlightened. Not collecting philosophical quotes to decorate your identity. Real shadow work feels like standing alone in the abandoned rooms of your own mind, holding a lantern, finally willing to see what you spent years avoiding. And strangely, that is where your power returns. Not when you become perfect, but when you become whole. When you stop dividing yourself into acceptable and unacceptable pieces. When you stop treating your wounds like enemies. When you realize your sensitivity was never weakness, it was buried intelligence. Slowly, something remarkable begins happening. Your intuition sharpens. Your emotional awareness deepens. Your tolerance for superficiality disappears. You start recognizing energies instead of appearances. You trust silence more than words. You stop chasing and start observing. And this is where most people become afraid of you. Not because you changed into someone cruel, but because authenticity unsettles people who survive through masks. Your presence begins exposing what others hide from themselves. And without even trying, you become a mirror. A mirror many people cannot comfortably face. But the truth goes further than that, because the next stage of transformation is where the real awakening begins. Not merely understanding your pain, but understanding who you are becoming through it. There comes a moment in every true transformation where the suffering stops feeling meaningless. Not because the pain disappears immediately, but because you begin seeing the hidden intelligence inside it. And once that happens, your entire relationship with yourself begins to change. The darkness no longer feels like punishment. It starts feeling like initiation. This is the stage Jung believed few people ever fully reach. Because this is the stage where awareness turns into reconstruction, where the fragmented self begins gathering its lost pieces, where the person you were conditioned to become slowly dissolves, and the person you were meant to become begins emerging from beneath years of emotional suppression. But the process is strange. At first, you do not feel powerful. You feel uncertain. Because the old identity no longer feels authentic, yet the new identity has not fully formed. And this creates a psychological void, a space where nothing familiar fits anymore. The conversations feel empty. The routines feel mechanical. The ambitions that once motivated you suddenly feel emotionally lifeless. Even your relationship with time begins changing. You stop rushing, stop chasing, you stop forcing. And this confuses people, because society only understands transformation when it produces visible external success. But inner transformation is invisible before it becomes visible. The soul changes first, reality follows later. And here is where everything changes. You begin understanding that your life was never truly blocked. It was patterned. Jung believed that until the unconscious becomes conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Think about how profound that is. Most people believe their suffering is random. But what if many of your struggles were unconscious repetitions, the same abandonment, the same emotional disappointments, the same fears, the same self-sabotage? Not because you were cursed, but because wounded parts of you kept recreating familiar emotional environments. The psyche seeks what is familiar before it seeks what is healthy. And this realization is painful, because it forces you to stop seeing yourself only as the victim of your life and start seeing yourself as an unconscious participant in patterns you never fully understood. But strangely, this realization is liberating, because if unconscious patterns created your suffering, then consciousness can transform it, and that is the beginning of personal power. Real power. Not domination, not status, not external control, but the power to observe yourself honestly without collapsing into shame. This is why one of the clearest clues that you are about to enter the best stage of your life is this. You stop blaming the world for your inner emptiness. Instead, you become curious about yourself. You begin asking deeper questions. Why do I fear being truly seen? Why do I abandon myself to keep others comfortable? Why do I chase people who emotionally starve me? Why does silence make me uncomfortable? Who was I before the world taught me who to be? And those questions become doorways. Doorways leading inward. Because the deeper you go into yourself, the less interested you become in superficial reality. Not because you reject life, but because you finally crave truth more than distraction. And this is where your perception begins shifting. You start noticing how unconscious most human behavior really is. How many people are driven by hidden fear? How many personalities are built around wounds? How many relationships survive only because both people are afraid to be alone? And suddenly, you no longer envy the lives of people to perform publicly, because you can sense the emotional emptiness hiding beneath appearances. This awareness changes your priorities completely. You begin protecting your peace instead of protecting your image. You begin choosing depth over attention. You become more selective with your energy because you finally understand something crucial. Your emotional energy shapes your reality. And most people leak theirs into environments that slowly destroy them. But what Jung discovered next was even deeper. He believed that the unconscious often sends signs before major transformation occurs. Not magical signs, psychological signs. A deep pull toward solitude. An intense desire for authenticity. A sudden loss of interest in superficial validation. Recurring dreams. Emotional sensitivity. The feeling that your old life no longer reflects your inner world. These are not random experiences. They are symptoms of inner evolution. Your psyche is reorganizing itself, and perhaps this explains why. Do you feel emotionally different lately? Not superior, not detached from humanity. Just unable to participate unconsciously anymore. You notice energy immediately now. Certain environments drain you instantly. Certain people leave your nervous system heavy. Certain conversations feel spiritually empty. And while others continue operating through automatic patterns, something inside you has awakened. You cannot unknow what you now see. And that awareness comes with loneliness. Because consciousness separates before it reconnects. This is why many people abandon their awakening halfway through. The isolation feels unbearable. The uncertainty feels endless. The ego keeps whispering, "Go back to who you used to be." But your soul knows something your fear does not. There is nothing left for you in your old identity. The mask already cracked, the illusion already collapsed. The unconscious already opened the door. And once that happens, transformation becomes inevitable. Stick with me because this is important. One of the greatest clues that the best stage of your life is approaching is this. You begin feeling emotionally guided by something deeper than external success, a quiet inner intelligence. Call it intuition. Call it consciousness. Call it the soul. But suddenly you start trusting feelings you cannot logically explain. You walk away from environments that look good externally but feel wrong internally. You stop forcing connections that drain your spirit. You stop seeking approval from emotionally unavailable people. And slowly, the chaos inside you begins reorganizing into clarity. Not perfect clarity, but enough clarity to stop betraying yourself. And this changes your entire emotional frequency. Because the moment you stop abandoning yourself, your reality begins responding differently. You become calmer, more grounded, less desperate for validation. You stop trying to convince people of your worth. You stop over-explaining yourself. You stop chasing emotional crumbs disguised as love. And strangely, this inner stability begins attracting different experiences into your life. Not because of magic, but because consciousness changes behavior. And behavior changes destiny. This is why transformed people often seem mysteriously powerful. Their energy is no longer fragmented. Their mind is no longer constantly fighting itself. Their emotions are no longer entirely controlled by unconscious wounds. There is alignment now, inner coherence, and that coherence becomes magnetic. But here is the truth most people are not ready to hear. The best stage of your life is not the stage where you finally become admired by everyone. It is the stage where you no longer need to be, where your peace becomes more valuable than performance, where your authenticity becomes more important than acceptance, where solitude no longer feels like abandonment, but like reunion with yourself. And perhaps this is why your relationship with loneliness is changing lately. You are beginning to realize that being alone and being disconnected are not the same thing. Some people are surrounded by attention yet remain spiritually empty. Others sit quietly with themselves and feel profoundly whole. The difference is self-connection, and self-connection changes everything. Because when you truly reconnect with yourself, you stop searching for identity in external places. You no longer need constant validation to feel real. You no longer shape-shift emotionally just to remain wanted. You no longer sacrifice your truth to avoid rejection. And this creates something incredibly rare in today's world, inner freedom. Not the kind sold through motivational slogans, real freedom. The freedom to exist authentically without constantly negotiating your worth. And if this resonates with the transformation happening inside you, if you feel like your old, Self has been dissolving while a deeper version of you slowly emerges. Write 520 in the comments, because what you are experiencing may not be a breakdown at all. It may be the beginning of psychological liberation. But the truth goes even deeper than this, because the next stage is where awakening becomes spiritual, where you stop merely changing your behavior and begin changing your entire perception of reality itself. At a certain point in the journey, transformation stops feeling psychological and starts feeling spiritual, not in the shallow sense people often speak about spirituality, not performative positivity, not escaping reality, not pretending darkness does not exist. Real spiritual awakening is far more unsettling, because it begins when you finally see through the illusion of who you thought you had to be. And once that illusion collapses, reality itself begins looking different. The world becomes quieter somehow. Not externally, internally. The noise inside your mind begins fading. The endless need to prove yourself weakens. The desperate hunger for validation softens. The unconscious urgency driving your behavior starts losing control over you. And in that silence, something ancient begins emerging. Awareness. Pure awareness. Jung believed that beneath the ego exists something deeper, something vast and timeless, something connected not only to personal experience, but to the collective unconscious itself. A hidden ocean beneath the surface of humanity. A place where archetypes live, symbols, dreams, instincts, ancient emotional patterns inherited across generations. And when a person begins awakening psychologically, they often start sensing this hidden layer of existence. Life stops feeling random. Experiences begin carrying symbolic weight. Certain encounters feel destined. Certain dreams feel prophetic. Certain emotions feel older than language itself. And this is where most people become frightened. Because awakening dismantles the illusion of control. You begin realizing how much of your identity was unconscious programming. The fears you inherited. The beliefs you absorbed. The emotional patterns passed through generations like invisible chains. And suddenly you understand something terrifying. Many people never truly meet themselves. They inherit personalities, inherited fears, inherited limitations, inherited emotional survival mechanisms. They become extensions of collective conditioning without ever questioning it. But something inside you started resisting. Maybe quietly, maybe painfully. But your soul refused to remain asleep forever. And this is why ordinary life no longer fully satisfies you. You are not searching merely for comfort anymore. You are searching for meaning. And meaning changes everything. Because once a person begins seeking meaning instead of distraction, consciousness deepens rapidly. You start asking different questions. Not, how do I impress people? But, what is my soul trying to become? Not, how do I avoid pain? But, what is this pain trying to teach me? Not, how do I fit into the world? But, what parts of myself did the world force me to abandon? And these questions open psychological doorways most people never dare to approach. Because beyond those doors lies confrontation. Confrontation with the shadow. Confrontation with truth. Confrontation with the parts of yourself you spent years escaping through noise, productivity, relationships, achievement, stimulation, and endless distraction. But what Jung discovered next was even deeper. The people who enter the best stage of their lives often go through a period where reality itself feels strangely unreal, almost dreamlike. You begin seeing through social performances. You recognize emotional masks instantly. You notice how desperately people cling to identities that secretly suffocate them. And perhaps most unsettling of all, you realize how much of your own previous life was built around survival instead of authenticity. This realization can feel heartbreaking, because you begin grieving versions of yourself that never fully got to exist. The creative self that was mocked, the emotional self that was silenced, the sensitive self that learned to hide, the authentic self abandoned in exchange for acceptance, and grief becomes part of awakening. Not only grief for what happened to you, but grief for who you had to become in order to survive it. Stay with me because this is important. Many people think awakening makes life easier immediately. It does not. At first, it makes life more honest. And honesty can feel brutal. You start noticing where you settle, where you betray yourself, where fear still controls your decisions, where loneliness manipulates your standards, where emotional wounds still shape your reality. But awareness is the beginning of liberation, because what remains unconscious controls you. What becomes conscious can finally transform. And this is why your sensitivity has increased lately. Your nervous system is no longer tolerating environments disconnected from your deeper truth. Loud energy exhausts you. Fake relationships drain you. Constant stimulation overwhelms you. Not because you became weak, but because your consciousness became refined. You are beginning to crave alignment instead of distraction. And alignment feels unfamiliar after a lifetime of emotional survival. This is why many awakened people suddenly feel drawn toward solitude. Not isolation rooted in pain, but solitude rooted in reconnection, a sacred withdrawal from noise, a return inward. And in those quiet moments, something extraordinary begins happening. You start hearing yourself again, your real thoughts, your real emotions, your real desires. Not the programmed voice of society, not the fearful voice of childhood conditioning, but your authentic inner voice. And for many people, this becomes the most emotional part of transformation. Because after years of self-abandonment, finally hearing your true self again feels almost overwhelming. Like meeting someone you lost a very long time ago. And perhaps this explains the strange emotional intensity you have been carrying recently. Part of you is mourning the old identity, while another part is quietly celebrating its freedom. This is why transformation often feels contradictory. You feel grief and relief simultaneously, loneliness and peace simultaneously, fear and excitement simultaneously. Because psychologically you are crossing a threshold between unconscious existence and conscious living. And thresholds are sacred places. They are painful because they require surrender. You cannot carry the old mask into your new life. The false identity cannot survive the awakening, which means eventually you must choose comfort or truth, performance or authenticity, attachment or freedom. And here is the hidden truth nobody talks about. Every major transformation requires emotional courage, not external courage, inner courage, the courage to disappoint people who benefited from your self-abandonment, the courage to release identities that no longer reflect your soul, the courage to stop shrinking yourself to remain emotionally acceptable, the courage to walk into uncertainty without fully knowing what waits ahead. This is why awakened people often appear calm externally while experiencing entire revolutions internally. Their soul is restructuring reality from within. And slowly, almost invisibly, their entire energy changes. They stop begging life for permission. They stop forcing connections. They stop chasing people emotionally unavailable to them. Instead, they become present, grounded, deeply aware. And awareness creates power. Not loud power, quiet power. The kind rooted in self-possession. The kind that cannot be easily manipulated because it no longer depends entirely on external approval. And this is where the best stage of your life truly begins forming. Not when everything around you becomes perfect, but when your inner world stops being at war with itself. When your mind, emotions, intuition, and soul begin moving in the same direction. That alignment changes reality more than people understand. Because once inner fragmentation heals, your external life starts reorganizing around your new consciousness. New opportunities appear. New people enter. Old patterns collapse. Unexpected clarity emerges. Not magically, psychologically, spiritually, energetically. And if this resonates with the transformation unfolding inside you, if you feel like life has been stripping away illusions, so something more authentic can finally emerge, write the word awakened in the comments. Because what happens next changes everything. The final stage is not merely awakening. It is embodiment. The moment you stop understanding truth intellectually and begin living it completely, there comes a final stage in transformation that very few people ever fully reach. A stage where the endless inner conflict begins dissolving, where the war between who you are and who you pretended to be finally comes to an end. And when this happens, something extraordinary enters your life. Not perfection, not constant happiness, something far deeper, inner congruence. The feeling that your soul is no longer divided against itself. Carl Jung believed that the greatest privilege of a lifetime is becoming who you truly are. But becoming who you truly are requires the death of everything false, the false identity, the false confidence, the false attachments, the false emotional performances built to survive environments that never truly saw you. And this is why the best stage of your life often begins after everything internally falls apart. Because only when illusion collapses can truth finally breathe. Maybe now you understand why life has felt so emotionally intense lately. Why certain people disappeared. Why your tolerance for superficiality vanished. Why silence became meaningful. Why loneliness became transformative instead of merely painful. Your soul was preparing you to stop living from survival and start living from consciousness. And here is the part most people never realize. The best stage of your life is not necessarily louder than the previous stages. In many ways, it becomes quieter, but the quiet is different now. It is no longer the silence of emptiness. It becomes the silence of inner peace. The kind of peace that emerges when you stop abandoning yourself. Because for most of your life, perhaps you were taught to disconnect from your own nature, to suppress your intuition, to question your emotions, to minimize your needs, to perform strength while secretly carrying an unbearable emotional weight. And over time, you became a stranger to yourself, not intentionally, gradually, like a house left abandoned for years. Dust collecting in forgotten rooms, windows closed, light unable to enter. But awakening changes that. Slowly, you begin returning to yourself, opening locked doors, letting light reach hidden places. And at first, the process hurts, because healing requires feeling what was buried. The grief, the shame, the loneliness, the anger, the unmet emotional needs you spent years pretending did not exist. But eventually, something remarkable happens. The emotions stop controlling you. Not because you suppress them again, but because you finally listen to them. This is true emotional intelligence, not emotional numbness, not forced positivity, but the ability to sit with your inner world, honestly without running from it. And once you develop this relationship with yourself, your entire reality changes. Because people who are deeply connected to themselves move differently through life. They stop seeking identity through constant external validation. They stop tolerating relationships that destroy their spirit. They stop abandoning their intuition to remain accepted. And perhaps most importantly, they stop apologizing for their depth. This is one of the greatest clues that you are entering the best stage of your life. You no longer feel the need to shrink yourself to make unconscious people comfortable. You finally understand that your sensitivity was never weakness. Your depth was never weakness. Your emotional intensity was never weakness. These qualities became painful only because they existed in environments incapable of understanding them. But in the right environment, your depth becomes wisdom. Your sensitivity becomes intuition. Your emotional awareness becomes power. And this realization transforms the way you see your past. Suddenly, the pain begins making sense. Not because suffering was beautiful, but because it forced consciousness to emerge. Your heartbreak taught discernment. Your loneliness taught self-connection. Your disappointments exposed illusions. Your emotional collapses forced authenticity. The darkness became the teacher. And this is why transformed people often carry a strange calmness within them. Not because they never suffered, but because they survived meeting themselves. And once a person truly faces themselves, truly walks through the hidden corridors of their own unconscious, external chaos loses much of its power over them because they no longer fear their inner world. This is what Jung understood better than most people. The goal of life is not becoming perfect. It is becoming whole. Whole enough to hold both darkness and light without splitting apart. Whole enough to acknowledge your wounds without building your identity around them. Whole enough to exist authentically even when the world rewards performance. And perhaps this explains why your priorities are changing now. You crave peace more than attention, depth more than popularity, truth more than comfort, meaning more than distraction. Your soul is becoming selective, not out of arrogance, out of alignment, because consciousness naturally begins rejecting what destroys inner peace. And the more aligned you become internally, the less chaotic your external decisions become. You stop chasing unavailable people. You stop forcing outcomes rooted in fear. You stop attaching your worth to temporary approval. Instead, you begin moving through life with grounded awareness. And awareness creates freedom. Not freedom from pain. Freedom from unconsciousness. The freedom to choose differently. The freedom to break inherited patterns. The freedom to stop repeating emotional cycles that once controlled your destiny. And this is where everything changes permanently. Because once consciousness expands beyond a certain point, you cannot comfortably return to old illusions anymore. You cannot unknow yourself. You cannot unsee the hidden patterns. You cannot return to emotional sleep after awakening to your own soul. And yes, this path can feel lonely sometimes, because authenticity naturally separates you from environments built on performance. But eventually, something beautiful happens. You stop experiencing solitude as emptiness. It becomes sacred, a place where your nervous system rests, a place where your spirit reconnects with itself, a place where clarity deepens. And from that inner clarity, a completely different life begins emerging. A life built not on fear, but on truth. Not on survival, but on alignment. Not on performance, but on authenticity. This is the best stage of your life. Not because every external problem disappears, but because internally, you are no longer at war with yourself. And that changes the way you experience everything. The way you love, the way you speak, the way you choose people, the way you handle pain, the way you carry silence, the way you walk through the world. You become softer without becoming weaker, wiser without becoming colder, more emotionally aware without drowning in emotion. And perhaps most importantly, you finally stop searching outside yourself for the home you were always meant to build within. So if life has felt strange lately, if your inner world has been shifting, if old identities are collapsing, if your soul feels restless, do not panic. You are not losing yourself. You are meeting yourself. And maybe, just maybe, these are the clues that you are about to begin the most beautiful chapter of your entire life.